In the golden age of Hollywood, when stars burned brightest and secrets ran deepest, one woman stood apart from all the rest. Katharine Hepburn, fierce, independent, untouchable. But what the world never knew was that the most mysterious chapter of her legendary life wasn't written on any silver screen. It happened in the shadows, away from the cameras, when Hollywood's most defiant star simply vanished. For nearly 2 decades, the woman who conquered Tinseltown disappeared from public view, leaving behind only whispers, theories, and a truth so shocking that even today, few dare to speak its name. Katharine Hepburn entered this world on May 12, 1907. With fire in her veins and rebellion in her heart, born to progressive parents in Hartford, Connecticut, she was raised to challenge everything convention, authority, and especially the suffocating expectations placed upon women of her era. Little did anyone know that this fierce independence would one day lead to one of Hollywood's greatest mysteries. Her childhood was marked by tragedy that would haunt her forever. At 14, she discovered her beloved older brother Tom hanging from the rafters of their family's vacation home, a suicide that the family desperately tried to cover up as an accident. The trauma scarred young Katharine deeply, instilling in her a darkness that would later fuel both her greatest performances and her most secretive moments. When she arrived in Hollywood in 1932, the studio system tried to mold her into their vision of feminine perfection. They wanted to soften her sharp edges, lower her distinctive voice, and transform her into another cookie-cutter starlet. But Katharine Hepburn was having none of it. She wore pants when ladies wore dresses, spoke her mind when women were expected to stay silent, and demanded equal pay when female stars were treated as disposable commodities. Her early films showcased a woman unlike any the world had ever seen on screen. In A Bill of Divorcement, she commanded attention with her raw, emotional intensity. By the time Morning Glory earned her the first of 4 Academy Awards, Hollywood began to understand they were dealing with something unprecedented, a force of nature who couldn't be contained, controlled, or completely understood. But behind the fierce exterior and legendary confidence, those closest to her noticed something else. There were moments when Kate would disappear into herself, when the vibrant actress would become distant and unreachable. Her co-stars whispered about her strange moods, her sudden departures from sets, and the way she seemed to be running from something even she couldn't name. These early warning signs would later make perfect sense when the truth about her disappearance finally emerged. The 1930s and 1940s marked Katharine Hepburn's meteoric rise to the pinnacle of Hollywood royalty. But behind every triumph lay a carefully concealed struggle that would eventually consume her. As she delivered one powerhouse performance after another, few suspected that America's most confident actress was slowly unraveling beneath the surface. Her collaboration with director George Stevens and Alice Adams revealed an artist capable of channeling profound vulnerability into her craft. Yet crew members later recalled how Hepburn would often isolate herself between takes, pacing frantically and muttering under her breath. When asked about her behavior, she would snap back to her usual sharp wit, deflecting any concern with her trademark intelligence and humor. The legendary partnership with Spencer Tracy began in 1942 with Woman of the Year, and their off-screen romance became one of Hollywood's worst-kept secrets. Tracy, a married Catholic man struggling with his own demons of alcoholism and guilt, found in Hepburn a kindred spirit battling invisible wars. Their relationship became her anchor, but also her prison. She waited in the shadows for 27 years, accepting the role of the other woman, a position that went against everything her independent spirit stood for. During this period, close friends began noticing disturbing patterns. Hepburn would disappear for weeks at a time, claiming to be visiting her family in Connecticut. But neighbors in Hartford reported that she wasn't there either. Where was Hollywood's most famous rebel going during these mysterious absences? The answer would remain locked away for decades. Her performances during this era in films like Adam's Rib and Pat and Mike showed a woman at the height of her powers. Yet those who worked with her noticed something had changed. The spontaneous joy that once lit up her face was being replaced by something more calculated, more controlled. It was as if she was performing not just for the cameras, but for life itself, hiding something so profound that even her closest confidants never suspected the truth. The first major crack in her facade came in 1955. During the filming of The Rainmaker, Hepburn collapsed on set, claiming exhaustion, but whispers circulated that it was something far more serious. The studio quickly covered up the incident, but those present that day would never forget the look of terror in her eyes, as if she had seen something that would haunt her forever. Spencer Tracy's death on June 10, 1967, marked the end of more than just Hollywood's greatest love affair. It triggered the beginning of Katharine Hepburn's strange descent into the shadows. What the public witnessed as a grieving woman's natural withdrawal from the spotlight was actually something far more complex and troubling. In the immediate aftermath of Tracy's funeral ceremony, she couldn't even attend publicly due to his family's wishes. Hepburn's behavior became increasingly erratic. Friends reported that she would spend hours talking to empty rooms, as if Spencer were still there. But it wasn't just grief driving these conversations. She was confessing secrets she had never dared share with anyone while he was alive. Her last major film with Tracy, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, had been completed just weeks before his death. During production, crew members noticed that Hepburn seemed to be saying goodbye not just to Tracy, whose failing health was obvious to all, but to something else entirely. She would stare into mirrors between takes with an expression of profound loss, as if seeing a different person reflected back at her. The months following Tracy's death revealed the depth of Hepburn's isolation. She had sacrificed her own identity for their secret relationship, turning herself into half a person waiting in the wings of someone else's life. But now, without Tracy's stabilizing presence, something darker began to emerge. The woman who had once commanded every room she entered started avoiding public spaces altogether. Her Connecticut estate became her fortress, but even there, she couldn't find peace. Household staff reported hearing her pacing the halls at all hours of the night, carrying on animated conversations with someone who wasn't there. When asked about these incidents years later, she would claim she was rehearsing for roles, but there were no scripts, no upcoming projects. Nothing but the weight of secrets that had accumulated over decades. The entertainment industry, still reeling from Tracy's loss, expected Hepburn to eventually return to the spotlight. After all, she had always been a fighter, a survivor who bounced back from every setback stronger than before. But this time was different. This time, Katharine Hepburn had reached a breaking point that no amount of talent or determination could overcome. The woman who had never backed down from any challenge was about to embark on the most mysterious chapter of her extraordinary life. The late 1960s should have been Katharine Hepburn's moment of triumph. With 4 Academy Awards under her belt and a career spanning nearly 4 decades, she stood as the undisputed queen of American cinema. Yet those closest to her began noticing subtle but alarming changes that hinted at the dramatic disappearance to come. It started with small things: missed appointments, canceled lunch dates, and an increasing reluctance to leave her Manhattan townhouse. Her longtime secretary, Phyllis Wilburn, became the gatekeeper to an increasingly reclusive star. Phone calls went unreturned, scripts were rejected without being read, and Hollywood's most sought-after actress seemed to be deliberately dismantling her own career. The few public appearances she made during this period revealed a woman transformed. The confident stride had become hesitant. The piercing gaze now darted nervously around rooms, and her famous wit seemed forced, as if she were playing a role she no longer understood. At the 1968 Academy Awards ceremony, where she was nominated for Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, her absence was notable, but what wasn't known was that she had actually driven to the venue, sat in her car for an hour, then turned around and went home without explanation. Her nephew and closest family members later revealed that Katharine had begun expressing paranoid thoughts during family gatherings. She became convinced that people were watching her, following her movements, and documenting her every action. While this might have seemed like typical celebrity anxiety, those who knew her best recognized that something much deeper was troubling the woman who had never been afraid of anything or anyone. The film industry began to take notice when she turned down a series of high-profile projects without explanation. Directors who had worked with her for years found themselves unable to even get meetings. Her agent, who had guided her career through its highest peaks and lowest valleys, was suddenly shut out completely. It was as if Katharine Hepburn was severing every connection to the world that had made her famous. The most telling sign came during a rare interview in 1969. When asked about her future plans, Hepburn stared directly into the camera and said something that chilled everyone present. "Sometimes you have to disappear to find out who you really are." At the time, it seemed like another one of her cryptic philosophical observations. Only later would those words reveal their true, prophetic meaning. December 15, 1969, a date that would later be marked as the last time the real Katharine Hepburn was seen in public. The occasion was a small, intimate dinner party at the home of director George Cukor, her longtime friend and collaborator. What appeared to be a casual gathering among Hollywood elite was actually Katharine's carefully orchestrated farewell to the life she had. Known guests that evening included some of the biggest names in entertainment, yet all later agreed that Katharine seemed like a ghost at her own goodbye party. She moved through the gathering with an otherworldly quality, speaking to each person as if she were memorizing their faces, their voices, their essence. Her conversations were intense and personal, focusing on memories rather than future plans. The evening's most haunting moment came when she approached the grand piano in Cukor's living room. Without any prompting, she began to play a melancholy piece that none of the accomplished guests could identify. Her fingers moved across the keys with a skill few knew she possessed, creating music that seemed to come from some deep, hidden place within her soul. When she finished, tears were streaming down her face. She made no attempt to hide or explain. As the party wound down, several guests noticed Katharine making what appeared to be final statements. To her Adam's Rib co-star Judy Holliday, she whispered, "Remember me as I was, not as I'm becoming." To director William Wyler, she said cryptically, "The woman you knew is about to take her final bow." These comments seemed poetic at the time, but their true meaning would become terrifyingly clear in the months to come. The most disturbing moment occurred as she was leaving. Katharine stood at Cooker's front door, silhouetted against the night sky, and turned back to the assembled group. "Don't look for me," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I won't be where you expect to find me." With that, she walked into the darkness, leaving behind a room full of confused and increasingly worried friends. Within weeks of that December evening, the phone calls stopped. The Christmas cards weren't sent. The woman who had maintained correspondence with friends and colleagues around the world simply went silent. Hollywood's most communicative star had chosen silence, and that silence would stretch on for years, leaving an entire industry wondering what had happened to their brightest light. The early months of 1970 marked the beginning of what would become one of Hollywood's most baffling mysteries. Katharine Hepburn, who had never missed a birthday, anniversary, or important event in the lives of those she cared about, simply stopped acknowledging the world around her. Her closest friends found themselves cut off without warning or explanation, left to wonder if they had somehow offended the notoriously sensitive star. Her regular haunts in New York City, the restaurants where she dined, the bookshops she browsed, the parks where she walked, all reported the same thing. She had vanished completely. The doorman at her Manhattan townhouse, who had greeted her daily for years, found themselves protecting not a resident, but an empty space. Neighbors began to whisper that the house seemed permanently shuttered, its windows dark both day and night. Even more mysteriously, her Connecticut estate in Old Saybrook fell into the same eerie silence. The local postmaster reported that her mail was being forwarded to an unknown address. The gardeners who had maintained her beloved grounds for decades were dismissed without notice, leaving the property to grow wild and unkempt, a sight that would have horrified the perfectionist actress who had taken such pride in every detail of her homes. The entertainment industry initially assumed this was another of Katharine's famous retreats, when she would withdraw from public life to recharge and refocus. But as weeks turned to months, concern grew into genuine alarm. Her longtime lawyer, financial advisor, and personal physician all reported that they had lost contact with their famous client. Even her family in Connecticut claimed to have no knowledge of her whereabouts. That the most chilling discovery came when a persistent reporter investigated the few public records still associated with her name. Bank accounts had been closed, properties had been quietly sold through intermediaries, and legal documents had been filed transferring her assets to a series of anonymous trusts. It was as if Katharine Hepburn was systematically erasing herself from existence, methodically removing every trace of her life and identity. By the end of 1970, Hollywood faced an unprecedented situation. One of its greatest stars had simply vanished without a trace. There were no death certificates, no hospital records, no travel documents, nothing to indicate what had happened to the woman who had once been the most recognizable face in America. The disappearance of Katharine Hepburn had become complete and total, launching a mystery that would captivate and confound observers for decades to come. As 1971 dawned without any word from Katharine Hepburn, Hollywood's elite began to mobilize in ways that had never been seen before. Studio heads who had fought with her over contracts, directors who had clashed with her over creative control, and fellow actors who had felt the sting of her sharp tongue, all united in their desperate search for answers about her disappearance. Private investigators were hired, but they found themselves tracking a ghost. Every lead ended in dead ends. Every witness had seen someone who might have been her but couldn't be certain. The most promising sighting came from a small town in Vermont, where a librarian swore she had seen Katharine researching genealogy records under an assumed name. But when investigators arrived, they found only the memory of a woman who had asked strange questions about erasing one's past. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, initially reluctant to involve themselves in what seemed like a celebrity publicity stunt, began to take the case seriously when they discovered the sophisticated financial maneuvers that had preceded her disappearance. Someone with considerable knowledge and resources had orchestrated the systematic dismantling of Katharine Hepburn's entire public existence. The question was whether that someone was Katharine herself or a more sinister force. Hollywood's rumor mill, never one to let facts stand in the way of a good story, generated dozens of theories. Some whispered that she had suffered a complete mental breakdown and been secretly institutionalized by her family. Others suggested she had discovered a terminal illness and chosen to die in private, rather than let the world witness her decline. The most outrageous theories involved everything from witness protection programs to alien abduction. Her former lover, Howard Hughes, himself no stranger to mysterious disappearances, was questioned by investigators but claimed to know nothing about her whereabouts. However, those close to Hughes noticed that he seemed unusually agitated when her name was mentioned, leading some to speculate that he might be financing her seclusion for reasons known only to the two of them. The search took on an almost mythical quality. As years passed without resolution, reported sightings came from around the world, and none in an Italian convent who bore a striking resemblance to the missing star. a reclusive artist in the French countryside who painted with unusual intensity, a woman in a small Irish village who spoke with a familiar Connecticut accent. Each lead was investigated and ultimately proved false, adding to the growing legend of Katharine Hepburn's inexplicable vanishing. While the world searched for Katharine Hepburn, the truth of her whereabouts was far stranger than any theory that had been proposed. Deep in the forests of northern Maine, in a cabin so remote it appeared on no maps and received mail through a complex series of forwarding addresses, the woman who had once commanded Hollywood's grandest stages was learning to live as someone entirely different.